Alright, so in the second video, sectional divisions grow in the United States at this time, largely because of the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott was an enslaved man whose Missouri slaveholder had taken him in to live in free territory before returning to Missouri. Okay, abolitionists helped Scott to sue to end his slavery. So Scott argued that the time he spent in free territory meant he was really free. In Dred Scott versus Sanford case, this went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against Dred Scott because African Americans were not U.S. citizens, and therefore Scott had no right to sue in federal court. The court went on to say that Missouri Compromise's ban on slavery was basically unconstitutional. Democrats liked the decision. Republicans said the decision was not binding, and that the Dred Scott ruling ends up intensifying sectional differences. So in order to apply for statehood, Kansas needed a constitution. The pro-slavery legislature of Kansas held an election for delegates to a constitutional convention. Anti-slavery Kansans boycotted the election. The convention wrote the Lecompton Constitution, in which slavery was legalized. Okay, President Buchanan asked Congress to admit Kansas as a slave state. The Senate accepted the Lecompton Constitution, but the House of Representatives did not. In 1858, the settlers in Kansas voted to reject the Lecompton Constitution. So Kansas did not become a state until 1861 as a result. Okay, so we first see Lincoln come on. He kind of starts to appear in American history now. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln was chosen by the Illinois Republicans to run for the Senate against Democrat incumbent Stephen A. Douglas. Lincoln and Douglas had held a series of debates. Lincoln opposed the spread of slavery into the Western territories. Douglas favored popular sovereignty. So, in the debate in Freeport, Illinois, Douglas formulated the Freeport Doctrine. In this statement, Douglas accepted the Dred Scott ruling, but he also said that people could still keep slavery out of a territory by refusing to pass laws needed to regulate and enforce it. The Freeport Doctrine pleased Illinois voters, but it angered Southern voters. Douglas ended up being elected senator. Lincoln used the debates to clarify the principles of the Republican Party. Lincoln also established a national reputation as a clear, insightful thinker and an eloquent debater. John Brown's raid. John Brown, a fervent abolitionist, planned to seize the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, which was today West Virginia. He would then free and arm the enslaved people in the area and begin an insurrection or rebellion against the slaveholders. Brown and his followers seized the arsenal on October 16, 1859, but within 36 hours were captured by U.S. Marines. Brown was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. The main thing from this is that many Northerners viewed Brown as a martyr for the slaves' cause. Southerners viewed Brown's raid as proof that Northerners were plotting the murder of slaveholders. Sorry about that. Okay, so this brings us to the election of 1860. John Brown's raid in Harper's Ferry was a turning point for the South. Southerners feared African American uprisings and were angered that Northerners would arm them and encourage them to rebel. Republicans denounced John Brown's raid, but many Southerners blamed the Republicans since they opposed slavery. In 1860, the Democratic Party was torn apart by the debate over slavery in the Western territories. Southern Democrats upheld the Dred Scott decision and supported slaveholders' rights in the territories. They wanted a federal slave code for these territories. Northern Democrats supported popular sovereignty. They did not want a federal slave code in these territories. So the Democratic Party could not agree on a candidate for the 1860 election. Northern Democrats, they chose Stephen A. Douglas, who supported popular sovereignty. Southern Democrats chose John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky. He was the vice president at the time. He supported the Dred Scott decision and a federal slave code for the Western territories. The Constitutional Union Party was formed by people who wanted to uphold the Constitution and the Union. Their candidate was former Tennessee Senator John Bell. The Republican candidate was Abraham Lincoln. Now, the Republicans campaigned against slavery in the Western territories and against John Brown's raid, and for the right of Southern states to preserve slavery within their borders. The Republicans also wanted high tariffs, a new homestead law for Western settlers, and a transcontinental railroad. Lincoln ends up winning the election. Now, the South saw his election as a victory for abolitionists. South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. By February of 1861, 6 more Southern states had voted to secede. Okay, so They tried compromise. Crittenden's compromise by Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky suggested several amendments to the Constitution. The amendments would guarantee slavery where it already existed. It would reinstate the Missouri Compromise line, extending it to California. Slavery would be banned north of the line and protected south of the line. This compromise, though, did not pass. Okay, so a peace conference was held February 1861 in Washington, D.C., but members failed to agree on a plan to save the Union. No secessionist states attended the conference. Seceding states met and on February 8, 1861, declared themselves to be the Confederate States of America, or the Confederacy. The Confederate Constitution was similar to the U.S. Constitution, except it stated that each state was independent and it guaranteed the existence of slavery in the Confederacy. It also banned protective tariffs and limited the term of the presidency. Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was chosen as the president of the Confederacy at this time. The Civil War begins. In his inaugural speech, Lincoln told seceding states that he would not interfere with slavery where it existed, but he said the union of these states is perpetual. He also said that the Union would hold on to the federal property in the seceding states. Lincoln announced plans to send supplies to Fort Sumner in Charleston Harbor. President Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy ordered an attack on the fort when it refused to surrender to the South. After hours of fighting, the Union commander finally surrendered. This was the beginning, is known as the beginning of the Civil War. All right, so President Lincoln asked for 75,000 volunteers to serve in the Union Army. States in the Upper South seceded, beginning with Virginia. The capital of the Confederacy immediately was changed to Richmond, Virginia. And Lincoln did not want the border states to secede, especially Maryland. So, since Virginia had seceded, he did not want Washington, D.C. to be surrounded by Confederate territory. He imposed martial law in Baltimore to prevent Maryland's secession. Under martial law, the military takes control of an area and suspends certain civil rights. Kentucky was important to the Union because it controlled the Ohio River's south bank. Kentucky remained neutral until the Confederate forces invaded it. Then Kentucky's legislature voted to stay in the Union. Missouri voted to stay with the Union, but it needed the support of federal forces. Okay, that's the end of the second video, and we'll talk more about some of the battles of the Civil War and more of the end of the Civil War in the next video. All right, thank you. Bye. Now, as always, look forward for a quiz. Thank you. Bye.